All right, let's dive in. Today we're tackling menhera,
Menhera.
which, you might have seen it floating around online,
Yeah.
especially like attached to fashion or anime, those kind of things.
Right.
But is it really just about like the sick, cute look, or is there more to unpack? We've got a few sources to help us out, a Wikipedia article to get us started, Urban Dictionary to see how people are actually using the word, and then we're going to get a little academic with a research paper.
Sounds like a good mix.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have a pretty well-rounded picture by the end of this.
I think so.
So origin story first. Our Wikipedia friend tells us menhera comes from 2channel.
2channel, yeah.
Which I know not everyone's going to be super familiar with that. It's very Japanese internet specific.
Right.
But basically imagine like the Wild West of online forums. Kind of like 4chan, but, with its own flavor.
And the term itself, it actually comes from the board dedicated to mental health.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Mentaru Harusuban, super long.
Yeah.
Got shorted to just Menheru, and then naturally the users became known as Menhera.
Makes sense. Gotta love the internet's ability to just shorten everything.
Exactly.
So we got this term born out of like online discussions about mental health, which is already kind of fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But then, of course, the meaning of menhera doesn't just stay still.
It evolves.
It evolves, right? So Urban Dictionary time. And it seems like in mid-Italy, menhera was actually used in kind of a negative way.
Yeah, more like a label, right, to kind of say someone has a mental illness.
Oh, wow.
And often used, not in a very nice way.
Almost hard to imagine now, right? Because it's so tied to this subculture and fashion.
It is a contrast.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is how menhera shifted, it became this whole subculture that actually wants to change how we view mental health, especially in Japan.
Okay.
And that's really pushing back against that man culture, which is all about, being stoic, keeping your struggles inside.
Right, very traditional.
Menhera is like, nope, let's express it. Let's talk about it.
Taking back the word. Almost.
Yeah, exactly.
And even in that Urban Dictionary definition, you see it, right? They describe menhera girls as like beautiful, cheerful, bright, but also acknowledge their struggles.
Totally.
Which is where it gets, I think, really interesting.
Yeah.
Because there's this idea that traits associated with mental illness could be seen as attractive or even endearing.
Right. That's a pretty big shift.
It is. It is.
In how we think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this journey from negative label to this whole complex subculture.
Right.
But how does it actually show up in fiction, in anime and manga, those kinds of things?
Well, this academic paper we have, it breaks down menhera girl characters into these types, kind of like a typology.
Oh, I like a good typology categories.
Exactly.
Makes it easy to understand.
So you have the sad girl, the mad woman, and the cutie.
Okay, I can already picture some of these.
Right.
So the sad girl is probably that like classic lonely, isolated character. You see that a lot.
Yeah, that's the archetype.
Then you have Mad Woman. I'm intrigued. Who's she?
She might be more obsessive, maybe fixated on a love interest, that kind of thing.
Ah, okay, I see where this is going.
And then, of course, the cutie, who really embodies that visual menhera style.
The fashion, the whole aesthetic.
Yeah.
And speaking of those fictional portrayals, I think we have to talk about Yonder.
Oh, yeah.
It's another trope that pops up a lot, often linked to mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I feel like people use them interchangeably, but I'm guessing there's a difference.
There is a distinction, yeah.
Okay, lay it on me.
So think of it this way. A menhera character, they crave attention, but from anyone.
Okay.
And that can lead to, self-harm as a way to cope or to get that validation.
So it's not directed at one person. It's just this, like, general need.
Exactly. More like a cry for help in a way.
That makes sense.
Whereas a yandere character, they're usually fixated on one specific person.
Oh, okay.
And they can become, possessive, maybe even aggressive.
Oh, wow.
To protect that relationship, it's a very intense kind of love.
So it's love, but it's like a very unhealthy, potentially dangerous kind of love.
Yeah, there's that darker edge to it.
Of course, I got to remember, these are just tropes, right?
Right.
We're not, trying to diagnose fictional characters here.
Not at all.
But it's interesting to see how these ideas about mental health are portrayed in media and how those portrayals evolve.
Absolutely. It reflects something about how we understand these issues, how we talk about them.
For sure. Okay, so we've covered the origins of menhera, the journey from stigma to subculture, even how it shows up in stories.
Quite the journey so far.
Yeah, it is. And now I think we got to address the elephant in the room. Or maybe the Hello Kitty with a syringe in the room.
Yes.
Which is the fashion, the whole aesthetic that Yami Kawaii vibe.
Right, Yami Kawaii.
For those who haven't encountered it before, it could be a little startling
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking pastel medical accessories, bandages, syringes as fashion.
Hello Kitty bandages, pillboxes shaped like hearts, maybe an outfit with, a syringe print on it.
Yeah, it's definitely a juxtaposition, right?
It is. It makes you wonder what's going on.
And then you have Menhera-chan, the manga character, who's literally like a hero through self-harm. The irony is just...
Yeah, it's hard to miss.
So is this helping or hurting? Because that's where I think the controversy around Yami Kawaii and Menhera fashion in general comes in.
Right. Some people say it's exploitative, using these sensitive images for shock value or just to be trendy.
And you can see that point.
You can.
But then there's the other side that maybe it's raising awareness about taboo topics like mental health and suicide.
Especially in Japan, where those things are often kept quiet.
Not talked about openly.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue.
It really is.
And I think the motivations behind Yami Kawaii, they probably vary a lot from person to person.
Yeah, some might be expressing themselves, some coping, some rebelling.
Who knows? Maybe some genuinely want to start a conversation.
It's messy, isn't it?
It is.
There's no easy answer.
So what stands out to you in all of this?
Honestly, I'm just struck by how Menhera challenges so many of our assumptions about, like, mental health, fashion, identity. It's not a simple trend. You can't just put it in a box and be done with it.
Right.
It's messy. It's contradictory. It definitely makes you think.
It does, and that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, I think so, too.
Yeah, and we're back, diving deeper into Menhera.
Really getting into the cultural currents beneath the surface.
Exactly, and in this part, we're going to kind of zoom out a bit.
Yep.
See how Menhera fits into larger trends, both within Japan and globally.
Because it does feel like it's tapping into something bigger, right? Something about how we think about vulnerability, self-expression, especially online.
Totally. And when you think about Japan specifically, a place that's, technologically advanced, but also socially reserved,
Yeah, that contrast is interesting.
Menhera becomes even more fascinating.
Because you have that emphasis on conformity, politeness, not rocking the boat.
Right, keeping your struggles private.
And then Menhera comes along with these very public displays of inner turmoil.
It's like a direct challenge to those unwritten rules.
Saying, hey, not everyone's okay, and pretending doesn't actually help.
Yeah, and our sources actually point out how important tech and online spaces have been for Menhera.
It makes sense. It started on those two channel boards, right?
It did, and online anonymity, it gives you that safety to express things you might not face to face.
Yeah, like a digital mask.
Letting you be more honest about your inner world.
No fear of judgment. And that creates community too, right?
Absolutely. People connect over shared experiences, find support online that they might not have offline.
And then that community, it starts to spill over into the real world, right?
Exactly. Influencing fashion, music, art, even sparking conversations about mental health that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Like Menhera created its own language, almost.
Yeah, a way to communicate things that regular language struggles with.
And that's where that Yami Kawaii aesthetic comes in, right?
That blend of cute and, creepy.
Unsettling, but also kind of endearing.
The juxtaposition itself is a conversation starter.
It's true. It makes you stop and think, why am I drawn to this?
It disrupts our expectations, makes us confront things we usually keep hidden.
Like, imagine seeing someone with a pastel pink syringe necklace.
Yeah, it's so unexpected.
You can't help but be curious.
And that curiosity can lead to a deeper exploration of what's going on.
Now, we've been focusing a lot on Japan, but Menhera is not limited by geography anymore, is it?
Not at all, thanks to the internet. It's global.
Which means new meanings, new interpretations.
Different cultures experience and express mental health in their own ways.
So those core elements of Menhera, the vulnerability, the Yami Kawaii look, the online roots,
those stay consistent.
but the lived experience, that will change.
In some Western cultures, for instance, Menhera might be seen as like a rebellion against that pressure to be happy all the time.
That toxic positivity.
Exactly. Menhera is like, hey, it's okay to not be okay.
And sometimes admitting that is like the first step towards actually feeling better.
Totally, but we also have to acknowledge that not everyone sees Menhera positively.
Right, there are concerns.
Some worry about, romanticizing or trivializing mental illness.
It's a valid point. Mental health is serious. And the line between raising awareness and glamorizing suffering, it can get blurry.
And then there's the argument that the focus on self-harm, on suicide, that could be triggering for some people.
Yeah, what empowers one person might really upset another.
Which is why responsible representation matters, acknowledging the complexity without sensationalizing or encouraging harmful behavior.
Finding that balance between honesty and being responsible with the message.
And ultimately, it's about creating a space where people feel safe seeking help without judgment.
So as we continue exploring Menhera, we got to keep those different perspectives in mind.
Yeah, it's not one single thing. It's dynamic with a whole range of interpretations and impacts.
And like any complex social phenomenon, there's no easy answers.
That's no simple conclusions.
But by engaging in these conversations, listening to different voices, approaching it all with an open mind,
we can start to understand what's going on.
and maybe even challenge our own assumptions along the way.
Now, there's another laker here that I find really interesting. The connection between Menhera and this broader concept of kawaii in Japanese culture.
We've talked about Yoni Kawaii, but this feels like it goes even deeper than that.
It does, because kawaii is more than just being cute, right?
Right, it's a whole thing.
It's a complex cultural concept with all these different emotions and aesthetics wrapped up in it.
It can be innocent and playful, but also, like you said, have that dark edge.
And you see that duality reflected in Menhera, for sure.
Those traditional kawaii things, the pastels, the childlike imagery.
But then, juxtaposed with mental illness, self-harm.
It's like Menhera is subverting those expectations, using kawaii to explore the darker side of things.
And that makes us question our assumptions, right?
Why do we associate cuteness with innocence? Why are we so uncomfortable with darkness mixed with sweetness?
These are the questions Ms. Menhera brings up.
It challenges us to think more critically about how we categorize human experience, how we box things in.
And by embracing that ambiguity, acknowledging that both kawaii and mental health can be multifaceted.
We can hopefully move towards a more nuanced and compassionate understanding of ourselves and the world.
Which brings us to another key aspect of Menhera, its relationship to gender.
We've talked about how it's predominantly associated with the young women. And that's not just random, is it?
Not at all. It speaks to very specific pressures and expectations placed on women in Japan and even globally.
Women are often expected to be cute, compliant, to not show too much emotion.
Fit into a very narrow mold.
And when they step outside of that, express anger, sadness, anything outside that acceptable range.
They're labeled as difficult, hysterical.
Menhera then becomes a form of resistance against those norms.
It's young women reclaiming their right to express the full spectrum of their emotions, the good, the bad, the messy.
Challenging what it even means to be a woman in a society that tries to control and silence them.
It makes you think about how subcultures like Menhera can disrupt those dominant narratives.
And create space for more authentic expressions of identity.
As Menhera keeps evolving and spreading, it'll be interesting to see how it interacts with those different cultural contexts and gender norms around the world.
Will it stay predominantly female? Or expand to include more gender identities and expressions? Guess we'll have to wait and see.
It's a conversation worth having, though.
Before we wrap up this part, I think it's important to address the potential implications of Menhera moving beyond just subculture.
Because like we've been saying, it's not just a trend, it reflects these deeper cultural anxieties about mental health.
And a growing awareness of those issues.
It has the potential to influence not just how individuals express themselves, but societal attitudes towards mental health as a whole.
Some argue that Menhera's focus on vulnerability could help destigmatize mental illness, encourage more open conversations.
Bringing those conversations out into the open.
So we can create a more supportive environment for people who are struggling.
And some suggest that using kawaii imagery might actually make those topics more approachable.
Especially for younger generations.
Challenging those traditional, often clinical ways of representing mental illness.
Making it feel more relatable, less intimidating.
Of course, we have to remember Menhera is not a replacement for professional help.
It's a subculture, a way to connect, share experiences.
But its impact goes beyond that. It can influence how we think about, talk about, and approach mental health as a society.
And that's something worth paying attention to.
So as we end this part, think about those broader implications of Menhera.
How might it contribute to these evolving conversations about mental health?
What are the potential benefits and drawbacks?
And how might it change our understanding of identity, vulnerability, what it means to be human in this world?
We'll keep exploring those questions in the final part of our deep dive.
So stick around, back for the final part of our Menhera deep dive.
Where we've gone from the depths of 2-channel to, well, the whole world.
It's been a journey.
It has.
And now I feel like we got to tackle the big question, right? After all this unpacking, what does it all mean? We've talked about the history, the looks, the cultural context, the controversies, but where do we land? What have we learned?
For me, one of the most interesting things about Menhera is it's a mirror to how our relationship with vulnerability is changing, especially online.
That's a good point.
It's like pushing back against that super curated, perfect image we see so much online.
The constant pressure to be happy, to show only your best side.
Right, and Menhera is like, nope, here are the rough edges, the cracks, the glitches.
And that really resonates, especially with younger people who have basically grown up online.
Because social media, it connects us, but it also creates this huge pressure to present that flawless image.
It's exhausting.
It is, and Menhera is almost like rebelling against that.
Yeah, like my messiness is part of me and I'm not hiding it.
And it's interesting how the community really took that word, Menhera.
Right. It started as an insult, basically, used to shame people.
But instead of rejecting it, they embraced it.
Turned it into something shared, even empowering.
Really flipped the script.
But now that Menhera is becoming more global, there's that question of appropriation, isn't there?
Yeah, how is it being interpreted outside of Japan? Are we just like taking the aesthetics without understanding what's behind them?
Like wearing those bandages and syringes just because it looks cool without getting the deeper meaning?
Exactly, missing that whole commentary on societal pressures, mental health in Japan.
But couldn't there be a positive side, too? Maybe Menhera, when approached respectfully, can actually open a dialogue about mental health, the pressures we all face no matter where we live.
I think you're right, that desire to express vulnerability, to find connection when you feel alone, that's universal.
And Menhera, with all its contradictions, gives us a lens to view that.
It reminds us that mental health isn't just sick or healthy, it's a spectrum.
We all fall somewhere on that spectrum at different times in our lives.
And Menhera is kind of saying, let's create spaces where people who are struggling feel seen, heard, supported.
Not stigmatized or silenced.
So as we wrap up this whole deep dive, think about those questions Menhera raises.
Yeah, how can we as individuals, as a society, be more compassionate about mental health?
How can we see vulnerability as a strength?
And use our voices, online and offline, to fight stigma and build better support systems.
Menhera is just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
But exploring it gives us these really valuable insights into, well, being human in this crazy world.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep connecting.